What's going down, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of Commander Ad Populum. Together we are Commander for the people, by the people, for the people. My name is Ryan. This is episode 45. If you're a returning listener, welcome back. If this is your first Commander Ad Populum episode, welcome. We've got a good one for you, some catch up, and then a very great demonstration of what our set retrospective section is, where we're taking a look at Onslaught. This is the leading set of the block with the same name, that is Onslaught block, and it kicked off a whole slew of new abilities, powerful cards, tribal stuff. Great set. It was my first ever booster box. I started playing a couple years prior to Onslaught, but of course, when you're a younger kid in elementary school, you don't have a ton of money. You got to beg your mom and save up and split it two ways, whatever. So Onslaught was my first box. I'm happy to share it with you guys. But of course, before we get into any of that, big thank you to official sponsors of the show, FusionGamingOnline.com. They are there for all of your gaming needs. And of course, you can check out Commander Ad Populum alongside Fusion's other sponsored content on themanabase.com. Like working with those guys, and there's a ton of great content there, so check it out. Second big thank you goes out to all the Patreon supporters. Wouldn't be possible without you guys, and huge thank you to brand new patron, my friend Geoff. No last name, he's an international man of mystery, but he knows who he is. And I do thank him very much for the support. He's part of the Discord family now. And just a quick shout out to everybody on the Discord family. There's some members going through some job search stuff. There's some members going through some stressful work situation stuff. We talk a lot on there about our own personal wellness. So everybody on there, I see you. I thank you. I can't wait to meet some of you face-to-face in Magic Fest Seattle or Anaheim or Minneapolis or wherever we're all going to be together the next time. It's going to be a ton of fun. I'm actually looking forward to a whole bunch of different travels this year. I hope that any of the health scares that are going on internationally don't prevent us from meeting up with each other. Final big thank you, of course, all of the other listeners, all of the community members that had taken part in last week's community section. I got some great responses on things that we've struggled with in the past as a community, and I've gotten some great responses on things that you guys are proficient at or things that you've improved at or ways that you've helped other people. And those all came by way of Twitter, Facebook, private messages, Discord. And my only hope is that if you've overcome any struggles or challenges in your life and you are willing to help, that you do reach out. And I am happy and privileged that I have a platform that people can come together around and make it known to other people that there's people like you out there. So I don't want to get super deep into that this week. I just wanted to say a big thank you to everybody that took part. There's other content creators. Previous guest of the show, Joey Schultz, wrote up a extremely touching, moving, powerful piece. He posted it to Twitter in response to my tweet asking you to share what you've struggled with in the past. And I was so happy that he took the time to do that. Zach Taylor from Commander Social as well did that. And I'm so happy to be able to get members of the community to open up and talk about the things that trouble us or the things that we struggle with as a means to bring everybody together closer. And I'm happy that Magic is that game that kind of kicked that all off for us. You know, like somebody started playing Magic at some point in their life years and years and decades ago in different places on the planet. And by chance, we linked up through Twitter or meeting each other face to face and we hit it off, or, you know, we both had a podcast that just through content creation, you know, somebody followed this person on Twitter and I saw, hey, who are these people? So I follow them and I find out that they make this great content. I listen to it. I get in touch. Hey, do you want to do some crossover stuff? And all of a sudden we're sharing these deep emotional connections that we have to each other, and hopefully that's the goal is to help people. So I was moved. It was a privilege to have these people that I consider friends and great people, great content creators, great people to follow on Twitter or wherever you social media. It was my privilege to be able to have these people open up and make our community a better place. And of course, in hearing any of that or reading any of the responses to my original tweets, if you wanted to open up, please just get in touch with me or find the tweets at CADPopcast on Twitter. Reach out to me on Facebook, Commander @Populum there. Send me a private message through Facebook Messenger. That's how I do a lot of my communications with people who don't use Twitter. Send me an email, cadpopcast@gmail.com. I love featuring stories of people who have used magic to help them or have had magic touch their lives or made their lives special in some meaningful, relatable way. If that's you or if any of those scenarios are you, please don't hesitate. If you're thinking, oh, I'll get to it, I'll do it. No, what are you waiting for? Just do it. Decide to do it. Send me something. I love to feature that kind of stuff because people like to hear about it and people tell me all the time, thank you for doing it. I love it. It helps me. So if you're out there and you have this profound story that you want people to hear, get at me. So I didn't really intend for that to be our community section for today, but it's kind of what it turned into. I want to leave lots of time or as much time as I can for Onslaught because I want to do this set justice. But before we do, real quick technical section. We're going to find out that Onslaught introduced the mechanic Morph onto the Magic the Gathering universe. And Morph has got some tricky rules interactions, and I'm not going to go right into the comp rules to explain any of it, but I do want to touch base on how the mechanic works before we get into the set retro, because I'm just going to say, it has Morph. And you kind of need to know what that means. And I know that they did Morph and Megamorph in Cons block, and players that are newer are going to know what that means. But even that was like, how many years ago was Cons block? Was that 2013 or 14? That's like 6 or 7 years ago already. Man, that makes me feel old. So Morph is an ability that mostly creatures had, because they did do non-creatures that had Morph, but mostly creatures had it. And it was an ability written on in the text box and a cost. So when you have Morph, that ability grants the card that it's on the ability to be cast face down for 3 generic mana. So essentially that just means you take the card and you put it face down on the table, so you're looking at the back of the card or the back of the sleeve. And at any time, you can pay the Morph cost and flip it face up. So let's break that down just a little bit. When you cast the creature face down, that follows all timing restrictions for casting a creature. Generally, that means main phase 1 or 2 when the stack is empty. Essentially, it's sorcery speed to cast a creature, right? Second thing, you are casting it. I know it's written in the text box of the card as if it was an ability, like an activated ability, but you're casting it. So things that trigger on cast will trigger. When you cast it face down, even if it's not a creature, when you cast it as a morph creature, you're casting a creature. So things that trigger on creature casting will also trigger. Things that trigger on creatures entering the battlefield will also trigger. Now, when you turn the card face up, when you pay its morph cost, the creature's already in play. So you're not casting it again, and it's not re-entering the battlefield. You never exile it and then re-enter it. It's just changing states. It's morphed, now it's unmorphed. So no ETB triggers, no cast triggers. And the particular tricky part about Morph is that because the card is just changing states when you activate mana, you can actually beat split second cards with this. This is a real thing. You've got a card that says when you turn this creature, when you morph this creature face up, counter target spell, or change the target of a spell, or bounce target creature to its owner's hand. And somebody's casting something that has split second, you can morph your thing face up, put that ability onto the stack, and then it'll resolve prior to the card with split second. It'll bounce your creature, and then their, kill everything thing with split second will resolve, and your thing will be back in your hand because you used morph, which doesn't use the stack. So I wanted to get those couple things out of the way because I've seen newer players be confused. By and large, though, generally, you're casting things face down. and then you're just morphing them face up at an opportune time. And Morph isn't a super popular mechanic in Commander, but it is a prolific mechanic in Magic as a greater whole. And of course, there are some pretty powerful cards that do use Morph, especially since the cons block Revisitation to Morph and Megamorph, and we'll cover that when we get to those blocks. But that all being said, let's get to Onslaught right now. This is going to be awesome. Onslaught was my favorite set for a good long while, even more favorite than Invasion. This was a much younger me, a much less nostalgic me, a much more in love with everything tribal me, because Onslaught was the first block that went hard into tribal. This is the first time that Wizards of the Coast said, this color is this creature, or this combination of colors is this creature type. And sure, stuff has existed in the past where, yeah, zombies have always been black, or slivers have always been 5-color, elves have always been green, what have you, but they introduced specific tribes in Onslaught as the tribes for this block, and they became a pretty important part of the standard environment. And it was cool, it was great, it was very flavorful, it was like real life elves versus zombies or elves versus goblins. Like, it was real life fantasy stuff, and it was just fun. So October 7th, 2002, this is the fall big set, 350 cards, 20 basic lands with great art. I still jam Onslaught basics in most of my Commander decks unless the lands are themed in some way. And because I bought so much Onslaught and played so much during this block, I have tons of foils of them, so most of my mana bases are, if they're not Invasion lands or Odyssey lands, they're, in all likelihood, they're Onslaught foil basics. So super cool. Onslaught is kind of the continuation of the Odyssey storyline with Kamal. He was a pit fighter. Jessica, she was his sister. They were pit fighters. She got captured by the Cabal and turned into the evil Phage. We'll see her later, I think next set. And Kamal went to the Croson Forest with the Mirari. That was that powerful artifact from Odyssey. And now he's a druid. And he doesn't fight anymore. He is just hanging out with the Mirari, and it's like mutating everybody. It's like Chernobyl, but magic. So we see a lot of really crazy mutated versions of tribes that we've come to know and like: zombies, elves, goblins, etc. The final character, and we're going to look at all these characters, is Ixidor. He's a reality sculptor. He is the guy that makes the morph creatures, and he makes a Chroma, another character we're going to see later, and then a Chroma and Phage are going to essentially meld, and we're going to see them again in another set. So lots of flavor stuff going on, super fun set. We take a look at some of the cycles prior to the legendary creatures, and there's lots. There is a cycle of each of the colored tribes. Each of the single color tribes had an avatar where they've got power and toughness equal to the number of that creature you control. So there's Doubtless One, Nameless One, Soulless One, Reckless One, and Heedless One. And the tribes were clerics, wizards, zombies, goblins, and elves. And I've seen all of these being played against me either in Commander or my casual days in 60 and 4 formats. Kitchen table formats, play what you got format, essentially. There's a cycle of chain cards, some of which have been played all the way back through the formats, all the way back to Vintage with Chain of Vapor. I think mostly Chain of Vapor is the one that gets played in Commander. We'll cover that in a second. There's charms for all you 5-color Ramos Dragon Engine charm players. There's a cycle of common cycling lands. So we're going to talk about cycling in a second. Cycling spells, cycling trigger permanents that destroyed standard. Legendary pit fighters. So there's more along the lines of these pit fighters like Kamal and Jessica. There's more of those. Lords. Tribal-based lands. This is one of the first times we've ever seen that. So there's cycles galore. And of course, the most famous one, the most famous cycle out of Onslaught, the ally-colored Fetchlands. These were the original printings. They too were reprinted in Cons block. I don't think that was a coincidence or by mistake that they reintroduced Morph with Cons block and reintroduced an allied color Fetchlands. I think that was by design, which is kind of just a tip of the hat to the old players just to make Cons block feel a little bit more nostalgic. So anyways, let's get at some of the, or all of the legendary creatures, of which there are 7. The first one, Canis the Omnipotent, or Arcanus. I'm not sure how anybody says it, but he was a pit fighter. He's a wizard. Of course he is, because most of the blue creatures were. 3/4 for blue 3. You can tap them to draw 3 cards, or you can pay blue 2 to return them to your hand. Very powerful card. 6 converted mana cost. I'm not sure if anybody's using them as their commander because there's better mono blue wizard commanders, but tap to draw 3. If you can somehow untap him, which you can in blue, this guy's going to draw you a lot of cards. Cool card. Next one, Ixidor Reality Sculptor. So this is the guy responsible for the morph creatures on Otaria. Recent spike with the Commander 2019 Kadena morph deck. Of course, he went up. Of course, Ixidor saw a spike in Cons block because there's morphs there too. Anyways, he's a 3/4 again for blue 3, a wizard again. Face down creatures get +1/+1. So if you cast a creature face down as a morpher, it's now a 3/3 instead of a 2/2. So he makes your morphs 3/3s for 3s, which is vanilla test on rate. It turns them into real cards essentially. And you can pay blue 2 to turn target face down creature face up. This gets around having to pay the actual morph cost. In most circumstances, it's more than blue 2, so this is a good deal after you spend the initial 5 mana to cast them. Next up, Jareth Leonin Titan. I think I play this card in Brion's Stoutarm. This is a 4/7 for white 3. It's a cat giant. Whenever Jareth Leonin Titan blocks, it gets +7/+7 until end of turn. So it becomes a 11/14. And then you can pay white and he gains protection from the color of your choice until end of turn. I play it in Brion's Stoutarm because it becomes an 11/14 and I can just huck it and deal 11 and gain 11. That's a good deal for me. Next up, this is probably the most powerful one and the most widely played of the commanders or the legendary creatures from Onslaught. This is Kamal, Fist of Karosa. So he's a 4/3 for green 4. He's a druid, human druid. And he says green, target land becomes a 1/1 creature until end of turn. It's still a land. So he can make lands into creatures. Sure, he animates them. Also, green 2, creatures you control get +3/+3 and gain trample until end of turn. That's overrun. So you can activate that ability as many times as you want, and you can just crash in and destroy your opponent when you have a team full of tokens. Or let's say you have just 1 or 2 creatures, but you have infinite mana. You can pay overrun mana cost infinite times to give all of your 2 or 3 creatures plus infinite and trample. Super cool. You can also use him to animate your opponent's lands and then cast something like Wrath of God or Elish Norn. That's another popular way to use them. So that's going to do some work for you. Next up, this is another one that I've personally built. This is Roryx Bladewing, and one of my favorite altars I've ever done. I did a full art Van Gogh Starry Night style Roryx Bladewing. 6/5 flying haste dragon for red 3. Full stop, all flavor text from there on out. But it's fine because he's got haste. And when you can slap down a 6-power beater with haste that has a bunch of equipment or 0 cast equipment, you're just going to beat face, double combat phases, double attack steps, whatever. You're just going to crash in. Cool card. Next up, Silvos Rogue Elemental. Green 3, 8/5, trample. It's an elemental. You can pay green to regenerate it. I'm not exactly sure what anybody's doing with this card, but it is 6 power for an 8. It is 6 mana for an 8-power trampler. Nothing to scoff at. The elemental creature type might be relevant. Regeneration is surprisingly relevant. I know I've got Lord of Tressorhorn that has black to regenerate, and people always forget, and you can always block for profit, especially with that huge power like Silvos has. And a lot of modern removal doesn't have the cannot be regenerated clause, so watch out for that. Final one, Viscera the Dreadful. Black 3, 5/5 flyer, tap destroy target creature, it can't be regenerated. She's a Gorgon. I don't know if that matters. I know when people play one Gorgon, or when I've seen Gorgons out in the wild, there's been like 14 or 15 other Gorgons because it's always Gorgon tribal. Maybe I'm biased towards that because I've seen it a bunch of times, but this was like the second coming of Avatar of Woe. You remember that from our Prophecy set retro. No discount on this one, so you're always paying the full 6, but you do get a 5/5 flyer that can crash in if you don't want to tap it to kill a creature. So those are the commanders. A couple of them are good, a couple of them are not bad, a couple of them are very build around. But in all, I have positive memories with probably all of these. But again, I'm just biased because this was my first ever booster box, and little Ryan remembers cracking open Kamals and Roryx Bladewings, or not cracking them and getting those stupid Fetchlands and thinking, oh, my rare slot was a land, right? And then trading them in at like $8. On to the set proper. It's funny, we've got Akroma's Vengeance before we saw the Akroma card. So Akroma's Vengeance used to be like the de facto #1 best kind of sweeper card because it was white 4, sorcery, destroy all artifacts, creatures, and enchantments. So it got mostly everything, especially when Planeswalkers came out, it got even better because it didn't get your Planeswalkers. And it also cycles for 3. And this is the first time we've seen cycling since, I want to say, Urza's Saga, Urza's Destiny Legacy. Like it's been a good hot minute since we've seen. Remember, this is 2002. Urza block was in 98, 99. So this is the first time we've seen it. It was brought back to introduce new players to old mechanics, something that Wizards still does. It was brought back for older players who have maybe come back to the game since the degenerate combo winter academy summer kind of made them leave. Again, listen to the set retros. I talk about people leaving the game because Tolarian Academy and Memory Jar and what have you. People are coming back now because it's cool, it's tribal, it's high fantasy, it's fun. Oh, cycling's back. I remember that. That was so cool. Hey, do you remember when Tolarian Academy was like the best card ever? Yeah. So people are coming back, and that's a strategy in terms of game design that we still see today. Speaking of cycling, we've got Astral Slide. This was one that destroyed standard. So this is white to enchantment. Whenever a player cycles a card, you may exile target creature. If you do, return that creature to the battlefield under its owner's control at the end of turn. You could exile your own thing and then have it re-enter and take advantage of ETB effects. You could exile their thing and then attack in when they have no blockers. And the thing about it was Astral Slide says whenever a player cycles. So when you're playing the Astral Slide mirror and you both have like 10 or 15 cycling things, everybody's blinking everything. And matches went to time and people decked, and it was just like, oh, it was a nightmare. First up of our big tribal lords, we've got Ancestor's Prophet. So this is a 1/5 human cleric. It used to have the creature type lord because that's what they did when it was essentially a lord. So this is a 1/5 human cleric for white 4. Tap 5 untap clerics you control, gain 10 life. They all had some form of tap 5 of the relevant creature type that they're a lord for. Get some pretty cool effect. Now, gain 10 life isn't that cool, but last week, we talked about a card that won you the game if you have 50 or more life. So you could just do this, gain 10, and then win the game with whatever that card was, or your Felidar Sovereign, or whatever that wins you the game for having 40 or more life. Shout out to Zach Taylor for Avon Brigadier, or Brigader. It's a 3/5 flying bird soldier for 6. All birds get +1. All soldiers get +1. Key is, in your bird tribal, you had all bird soldiers, so you would just like have this army in the air. And bird soldier, those were both tribes that we saw in Onslaught block in some form or another, or on the same card sometimes. Birds were in white and blue, and soldiers were in white, of course. Clerics were in white, wizards were in blue. Like, they mixed up the tribes so crazy in this set. I took some time and looked up the different pairings of the tribes prior to doing this, and it was like beasts was one of the tribes, and they were in primarily green and red. Secondary, black, blue. Birds were in white and blue. Secondary, black and red. Clerics were in white and black, and there were some cool ones. Dragons, red, of course, and blue. Goblins in red, secondary in black. Illusions were in just blue, but they could be anything. You could change their creature type into whatever you want. So generally, it was advantageous to have something with the prefix on its name, Mist Form. And any longtime followers of any of my content know that I've got a Mist Form style deck. We're going to talk about that next week or the week after, maybe whenever we're doing the Legions and Scourge set retros. Soldiers were in 3 colors, wizards were in 5 colors, and then zombies, of course, just black. So lots going on with creature types in this set. Moving on, we've got Battlefield Medic. I could not beat this card for the longest number of years. It's a cleric for white 1. Prevent the next X damage that would be dealt to target creature this turn, where X is the number of clerics on the battlefield. Against Cleric Tribal, there was nothing that you could do. Maybe that was just like... Maybe that was 14-year-old me. I don't know. Next up, Catapult Master. So this is tap 5, untap soldiers you control. Exile, remove target creature from the game. Exile target creature. So you tap 5 of your soldiers and you just dust one of their guys. Exile them. That card is actually good. It's seen reprints a couple times, and soldiers are fairly prolific tribe. You can make lots of tokens. That's a cool one. Circle of Solace was the kind of the Circle of Protection or Story Circle type card where when it enters the battlefield for 4 mana, you choose a creature type. And then you can pay white 1 the next time a creature of that type would deal damage to you, you prevent the damage. So that was a good one. Remember, very tribal focused. If tribal's in your meta, consider that one. If you're playing like the white Enchantress Pillow Fort style deck. I've got a good one here. This is a little bit of a hidden gem, and I think you can craft scenarios or board states where this is actually really good, and it's 3 mana only, so it's called Harsh Mercy. Sorcery for white 2. Each player chooses a creature type. Destroy all creatures that aren't of the chosen type. They can't be regenerated. So you get to choose 1 creature type. You just choose your best thing is how you do it. And you kill everything else. So when there are players sitting across the table that aren't playing tribal, and they might have a board of 4, 5, 6 big things, sure, they're going to keep their best thing, but you are kind of going to Wrath of God them. And if you are playing some tribal strategy, you just choose, let's say you choose soldier, and all 10 of your creatures are soldiers. You've kind of one-sided swept them. So that's a cool one. I think it's a little bit underplayed. Here's another one in Commander. This used to be like the de facto white removal, right? This is an instant for white 2. It's called Oblation. The owner of target non-land permanent shuffles it into their library, then draws 2 cards. So I can tuck your thing, get rid of your thing, and then you draw 2. Or if I've got some crappy little thing that's going to die anyways, I can shuffle it into my own library and then draw 2. So this is kind of card draw in white. Maybe you can craft a scenario where you save something and you can tutor for it again. Maybe it's got an ETB that you want to take advantage of a second time. Oblation used to be a highly played card. Now, I don't see it very often. Maybe it's time to dust them off. Last white card, and originally this was printed in Onslaught. Just recently reprinted in Mystery Boosters, actually. This is Weathered Wayfarer. So this is a human nomad cleric. There it is. It's cleric for white. It's a 1/1. White, tap, search your library for a land, reveal it, put it into your hand. And you can only activate it if an opponent has more lands than you. So this is like land tax the creature, and it was getting pretty expensive for a good long while. Into blue, there's a card called Artificial Evolution. It lets you choose a creature type word on a card and change it to a different creature type. So this is a little bit of a combo card. There's cards that say, like, whenever an ally enters a battlefield, put a wolf into play. Well, you could change that wolf word to ally again. So whenever an ally enters the battlefield, put another ally onto the battlefield, and you can infinitely get more allies. So that was a thing you could do with Artificial Evolution. Blatant Thievery, original printing in Onslaught. Blue, 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 4. For each opponent, gain control of target permanent that player controls. Each opponent. I have people ask me that every single time. You just get to pick like everybody's thing? Yes, each. Very good. Chain of Vapor was that chain that I was talking about that sees play all the way back into Vintage. I don't know if it still does, but it did. And all the chains were like this. You could return target non-land permanent to its owner's hand. Then that permanent's controller may sacrifice a land. So it did something, and then we could do something again. And if we did, or if the target did, they could copy Chain of Vapor. That's why it was a chain. And you chain your own thing, sacrifice a land, and we can copy Chain of Vapor. Sacrifice something, copy Chain of Vapor. So we can copy Chain of Vapor a whole bunch of times by sacrificing all our lands. Let's say we're going to Alpha Strike to win the game. Just sacrifice 5 or 6 land, copy Chain of Vapor 5 or 6 times, and bounce their whole board and swing in for the win. Next up, original printing for Future Sight. This is blue, blue, blue 2, and it had Ixidor on it with, he's in like this weird staircase. This is the original art. Play with the top card of your library revealed. You may cast the top card of your library as though it was in your hand. Thing to remember about this one for new players though, when you cast it, if there's anything that triggers on casting it out of your hand, that won't trigger because it's not in your hand. It's still on the top of your library. That's still where you're casting it from. So just a word of caution there. I'm scrolling through the list here and I'm seeing all the wizards, and I want to talk about every single one of them because I had the wizard deck. Like that was my tribe, right, when I played Onslaught. And there's a whole bunch of them that just everything cares about tribes, right? Scrolling through some more. Onslaught actually has a banned card. I forgot about this. This is Trade Secrets. Blue, blue 2, target player draws 2 cards, then you draw up to 4 cards. That player may repeat this process as many times as they want. So they draw. We draw up to 4 each time. They try and deck us, and then we just like stop drawing when we have our whole deck in our hands. So this card created really weird political scenarios, and it always led to the person who gets to draw 4 drawing their whole deck. And it was fun. It was cool. There was tricksy ways to use it, but I'm glad that it's banned. Think of when there are 2 players. One has a Consecrated Sphinx, one has a clone of a Consecrated Sphinx, and the scenario that makes, that's essentially how Trade Secrets worked. And I want to highlight another cycle right here. This is the words cycle, and they all triggered when you drew a card, and you can pay 1 if you do. Words of Wind says each player returns a permanent to their owner's hand. So instead of drawing the card, you can pay 1 and everybody bounces something. This one still makes you card advantage because everybody's losing something. We're just not drawing. The black one made people discard. It was in the mono black control deck in standard, a la 2002. That's just made me think of it. These see play, and you can combo with these where you can make infinite mana and draw your whole deck, and then just like play a words and make everybody else discard their whole hand if it's Words of Waste, or bounce all of the permanents they control if it's Words of Wind. And speaking of black, first one I want to talk about, Cover of Darkness. This is an enchantment for 2. When it enters the battlefield, choose a creature type. Creatures of the chosen type have fear. And this is the first time we saw the word fear when it wasn't the name of the card, fear. And essentially fear was the predecessor to what is now intimidate, where creatures with fear can only be blocked by black and artifact creatures. We know that now as intimidate, where it's the same color or artifacts, and any color can have it, not just black cards get fear. That's a little piece of Magic history trivia type thing. I like throwing those in when I can. And Cover of Darkness is cool because you could just drop it and make your whole team unblockable late in the game. Or you could drop it early game and start like just chipping away for 2 until you drop like a Lord or 2 Lords and just crash in for like 15. This is a cool card. Here's a funny one. I don't know. This just brings back memories, this one. I don't know if it's any good. You could think of scenarios where it would be good in life gain metas. This is an instant for black. It's called False Cure. Until end of turn, whenever a player gains life, that player loses 2 life for each 1 life they gained. So somebody's popping off with like a 30-point Exsanguinate, you could just like False Cure and then they die. Yeah, so good. Or life gain metas, they're popular now because people aren't running Infect or Voltron, so life gain is actually good now. Next Lord I want to talk about, this is Gravespawn Sovereign. What a cool name. And Gravespawn Sovereign was a zombie for black, black, 4. It was a 3/3, tap 5, untap zombies you control, put target creature card from a graveyard onto the battlefield under our control. So you could just zombie tribal it up until something died and you just take it back. This is a cool one. I know I've lost to that because my friend Adam had that card and I wanted it so bad. And then when I got one, I could never make it work because I didn't build decks like that. I don't know. Forget about it. Patriarchs Bidding is our next card. Each player chooses a creature type. Each player returns all creatures of the type they chose to the battlefield from the graveyard. So great in tribal decks, not so good if you're playing against an opponent that just has random creature types. Maybe they get their best thing in their graveyard, but we get everything. And if you heard last week when I talked about getting everything from my graveyard with my Balthor the Defiled deck, this is another way that I can do it. You just name zombie and you get back all your zombies, your gray merchants, your Phyrexian delvers to reanimate things that weren't zombies. Super cool card. Rotlung Reanimator is the next lord. Sort of. So this is a 2/2 for 3. It's a zombie cleric, so they're mixing it up now. There's the black-white thing. When Rotlung Reanimator or another cleric is put into your graveyard from the battlefield, put a 2/2 zombie creature token onto the battlefield. So whenever you have a cleric die, you get a zombie. Very flavorful, and it tied in the zombie and the clerics that both existed in those two colors. So there's a lot of flavor bleed and subtle nuance that made this set so cool and fun to play. Shepherd of Rot, Soulless one. I'm just going through zombies now. Undead Gladiator, that one ruined standard too. Siphon Mind, super secret sleeper card. 4 mana, each player discard, each other player, so each of your opponents discard a card, then you draw cards equal to the number discarded that way. So that is a 4 mana, usually draw 3. The downside being if an opponent has no cards, you wouldn't draw because they wouldn't discard. But sometimes I like Siphon Mind better than the draw 3, lose 3, because you jam enough draw 3, lose 3, draw 2, lose 2s into your deck, all of a sudden you're at 28, 26 life, and it's oh, I did this, right? Moving on to red, this is the first set that Aggravated Assault was ever printed in, and this goes infinite with lots of stuff too. It's an enchantment for 3, you can go red, 3, untap all creatures, and you get to attack with them again. So powerful card, goes infinite with Sword of Feast and Famine, things are Bear Umbra, things that untap your lands when you attack. Brightstone Rituals, shout out to all the Zata players out there. Everybody knows that card. You get a red for each goblin you control. So usually in Zata, that'll get you 10 or 12 red mana if you cast it late in the game on your Storm turn. And then, of course, you can copy it or recast it from your graveyard with Past in Flames or Underworld Breach now. Goblin Sharpshooter, initial printing in Onslaught. Insurrection, original printing in Onslaught. I don't think there's a red card that's won more games of Commander than that. I don't need to tell you about it, but I will anyways. 8 mana, steal all the creatures, they all gain haste, win the game. That's what that card does. Mana Echoes, only printing ever, as far as I'm aware, was in Onslaught, and this was a 4 mana enchantment, and whenever a creature enters the battlefield, add 1 mana of your mana to your mana pool for each other creature that it shares a type with. So as long as you can pump out creatures of the same type, it's going to make you more and more and more and more and more mana. So Goblin decks, Sliver decks, anything where you can tap to make a creature, like a Kranko deck or a Sliver Queen deck, Elf decks, if you're playing green or red in your Elf deck, sure. That's a good one, but certainly pricey because it's never been reprinted. It's a $30 card, $63 foil. That's an expensive one right there. The Red Lord, Skirk Fire Marshal. Protection from red, which is relevant. Tap 5, untap goblins you control. Skirk Fire Marshal deals 10 damage to each creature and each player. He's got pro red, so he doesn't hurt himself. But he kills everything and tens everybody. So what you do, because you have a ton of goblins, you cast them for 5, and your goblins aren't affected by summoning sickness because tapping is in the cost on Skirk Fire Marshal. So you can have 10 goblins, or 9 other ones in him, and go tap 5 and respond to that ability, tap 5 again, so you can actually get 20 damage to each creature and each player. I've lost to it, I'm sure, a bunch of times where Brando or just random goblin players, because they all seem to play this card, have just responded to that ability on the stack and tapped 5, 10, 15, 20, 25 goblins. Everybody take 60 or 80 or whatever it is. Super fun card. And of course, prior to all of those abilities resolving, you can sacrifice all your goblins to a Skirk Prospector, which says sack a goblin, get a red. another Zata special, another Goblin special. A lot of what you'll see in Goblin decks was printed between the years of 97 and 2002. Almost all Goblins at C Play are printed in that time frame because they were in between like Tempest block and the end of Onslaught block. That's where most Goblins at C Play were actually printed. Moving along into green, our second banned card in Onslaught. Turns out this set's pretty powerful. This is Biorhythm. It's a sorcery for green 6. Each player's life total becomes the number of creatures they control. In the way early days of Commander, probably even before I played. Somebody would go, Wrath of God, Biorhythm. The game ends in a draw. Or you'd have an indestructible creature, Biorhythm. My life total becomes 1. You guys all lose. Wrath of God, play a 1/1 for 1. Biorhythm, you guys all lose. So that's why that card is banned. There's a ton of really solid elves in this set. I think it would behoove me just to read the names of them. Generally, they are the elf deck in Legacy or Modern, if that's still a thing. And they are 90% of the elf deck in Commander. They are the Birchlore Rangers, the Bloodline Shamans, the Elvish Guidance, Elvish Pioneers, Elvish Vanguard, Voice of the Woods, Well-Wisher, Wirewood, Herald. Like, everybody knows these cards, so I'm not going to go too deep into the elves, but there was a bunch of other good green stuff here that I'd just like to touch on real quick. Krosan Tusker, kind of fallen out of favor in Commander, but it was originally printed in Onslaught, and it was a cycler that when you cycled it, you could search for a basic land and put that land into your hand. Or it was a 6/5 beast for 7 mana. So you had some options there. Late game, beater. Early game, cycle it to draw a card, search for a land, so you didn't miss your 4th or 5th land drop. Overwhelming Instinct. Lots of people talk about the enters the battlefield, draw a card cards in green now. And while those are good, how do we continuously gain value out of them if we brick on a bunch of those draws and have lands or enchantments or artifacts? Well, we can play Overwhelming Instinct. It's an enchantment for 3. Whenever you attack with 3 or more creatures, draw a card. So all those creatures that we were casting and drawing off of in our Tulane decks or what have you, we can attack with them somewhere, I bet. Like somewhere we can attack with them and draw cards. Token decks, the elf deck, they all like that card too. Steely Resolve. This card's getting expensive because I don't think it was ever printed, and I never see this card played in Tribal because people either don't know about it or it's too expensive for them to buy. And this is an enchantment for 2. When it enters the battlefield, choose a creature type. Creatures of the type of your choice have Shroud. Just straight up. Your creatures have Shroud if you're playing Tribal. Shout out to my boy Animar. Weird Harvest was in this set. It was reprinted in 9th, but we don't care about that because Weird Harvest is a mighty card. Green, X, sorcery. Each player searches for X creatures, puts them into their hand. That is an insta-win in Animar because you search for Ancestral Statue and you bounce it infinite times and you play Walking Ballista and you kill them. That is a CEDH combo. I wouldn't recommend that people just do that, but Weird Harvest could also be a fun group hug card if you wanted to go down that route. Next up, Cryptic Gateway. I lost to this card so many times too. This is an artifact for 5. You tap 2 untapped creatures you control to put a creature that shares a creature type with them onto the battlefield. You lose cast triggers, but you do get ETB triggers still. So you can just like tap 2 things and get a third thing that's kind of the same. And you do get around summoning 6. So if you have maybe 3 elves, you can tap 2 of them to get a 4th one. Tap 2 of them to get a 5th one. Maybe it enters the battlefield, gives you a token. Tap 2 of those, get another one. So that card can kind of spiral out of control. Here's another one that saw a spike anytime there's Morphers printed. This is Dream Chisel. This is Ixidor's kind of weapon pipe thing. It's an artifact for 2. Face down creature spells cost 1 less to cast. So your Morphers now are 2/2s for 2. So that goes in like every Morph dot deck, I'm sure. And of course, the under-supported tribe card, Riptide Replicator. X4, enters the battlefield, choose a creature type. Then you can pay 4 and put an XX creature of the chosen type onto the battlefield. So you can just choose whatever tribe you're playing. So not too many artifacts, but moving into lands, there's quite a few. There's Barren Moor, Forgotten Cave, Lonely Sandbar, Secluded Steppe, and Tranquil Thicket. You'll recognize those as being the 5 common cycle lands that were recently reprinted in Modern Horizons into Modern for the first time, making like the cycle, Life on the Loam, land deck a thing kind of for like 1 second. The Onslaught foils of these lands, still a lot of money, but they've been reprinted in, like I said, Modern Horizons, multiple Commander precons. They are very available. They do go in land decks. Muldrotha decks like them because you can draw a card off them and then play them with your Muldrotha as your land drop. So those are cool cards. And then, of course, there was a cycle of tribe-specific lands. I'll read a couple of them. For example, there's Daru Encampment. The Daru were like the race of soldier people. And it taps for colorless, or you can go white, tap it, target soldier gets +1/+1 until end of turn. So it was a little bit of a pump on your white soldier land. The Goblin one was similar, Goblin Burrows, where you can tap red and 1 and it to give target Goblin +2/+0 until end of turn. Riptide Lab is probably the most played one because it actually bounces a wizard you control back to your hand. So typically I bounce my Snapcaster Mage or an Archaeomancer to my hand, and when I cast either of those, I can do some graveyard recursion over and over. I've seen this used to great effect with Archaeomancer and Time Warp, where you can cast your Archaeomancer, your Time Warp, and bounce it each turn, and you can take infinite turns. So that's kind of how this card works. Foils of that are ridiculous as well. Seaside Citadel was the bird one. Starlit Sanctum was the white-black cleric one. Any white-black cleric, anything is going to go in your Shadowborn Apostles Athreos deck. That seems to be the most popular way to play that kind of subculture of Shadowborn Apostles. Unholy Grotto is the zombie one. This is one of my favorites. You can go black, tap it, return target zombie card from your graveyard on top of your library. So that is a budget, but only for zombie, Volrath Stronghold, which is a very expensive card now because it wasn't printed since Stronghold. I think it's a reserve list card. So Unholy Grotto is going to do that on the cheap. And last one, if we don't include the Fetchlands, which we already talked about, last one, Wirewood Lodge. And this lets you pay green, tap it to untap target elf. You could untap your Priest of Titania or your Wirewood, whoever that buffs all your creatures for how many elves you control, and you can make a ton of mana or make your whole team really big. So that's powerful land in your elf decks. Touched on the basics already. They're beautiful. Look them up. I guarantee you'll find lands in there that you would like to play if you like old border cards. They feel like 2002 era Magic lands. And that's it. I hope everybody likes Onslaught as much as I do. I like the whole block. It's very nostalgic. Lots of good stuff. Like that set retro was hugely long. Might have been our longest one yet. Huge thank you to FusionGamingOnline.com. They're there for all of your Onslaught needs. Of course, if you're into any altered art cards, you can get them from FusionGamingOnline.com. Send them to me. They arrive in a couple days, and I get them turned around out my door as soon as I can. Makes it quick, easy for you, and we all appreciate that. Huge thank you to all of the Patreon supporters at patreon.com/cadpopcast. Couldn't do it without you. If you'd like to be a patron, there's a bunch of great benefits. If it's not quite right for you, like I said at the top of the show, just start a conversation and tell me about it. Send me an email. Give me some topics. This is Commander for the people. At CADPopcast on Twitter, Commander@Populum on Facebook, cadpopcast@gmail.com. Big thank you to everybody who has been sharing things that they're good at to help people, things that they struggled with, to let everybody else in the community know that they're not alone if they're struggling. I very much appreciate all of that kind of support for everybody in my community. And on that note, everybody, I will see you next Wednesday.